Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Our speaker today is Mr. Hugues Laurenge, who is a child protection specialist working at UNICEF Headquarters in New York. His role is to develop and lead the world of the Office on Mine Action and Explosive Weapons, including explosive risk education and implementation of various relevant treaties and protocols. Mr. Laurenge has 22 years of experience in mine action and began with UNICEF in 2002, working for protection, education, and communication engagements on policy, program design, and management from various headquarters, and at country levels in Africa, Asia, and Europe. He holds a master's degree in policy and management from the York University of York. Over to you, Mr. Laurenge.
Thank you so much, Dr. Durbach, for this very nice introduction. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for some of you. It's a pleasure to join this webinar series. I would like also to thank my counterpart in UNDP, Oksana Leshenko, who advocated for this presentation on mine action. So thank you to her as well. I will share now my screen. Today we will talk about mine action, and the presentation will be threefold. I will start explaining the issue, the problem related to explosive weapons, in particular landmines and other explosive ordnance. And we'll look at their impact on people, on children. Then we will dig out on what is mine action and try to understand what is this sector about. And finally, we will discuss how this sector is relevant in terms of using a public health approach, actually to which extent this sector is by itself a public health intervention. On the left hand of the screen, you can see a young girl who is 8 years old, and she's from Darfur on the border between Sudan and Chad. And she got injured while she was fetching water in a well, in a very deep well, in a semi-desertic area. And she had a bucket linked to a very long rope, like a 30-meter long rope. And because it was dry season and we had a lot of drought in this region, she had actually to scrub the bottom of the well to find the water, a small puddle of water. And when she did this, she took a metallic object that was very attractive, and that was in the bucket. So when she took the bucket, she got the water and she pulled out this object, and it was an explosive device. And that's when she lost her hand, as you can see on this picture. This is a typical situation that not thousands, but millions of people may face even today in many countries, in around 60 countries around the world. First, I will talk about the problem in the global issue that we have with those weapons. And I will first talk about this acronym that might not be familiar to you, EWIPA, explosive weapons in populated areas. So this is an issue that we are facing in many countries, and it's related to the whole universe of explosive weapons. Explosive weapons here are only conventional weapons. And when I say conventional weapons, it means that today we won't discuss about weapons of massive destruction, such as nuclear weapons or chemical weapons or biological weapons. We will focus only on conventional weapons and explosive weapons. Explosive weapons are weapons that detonate explosive with a fragmentation and a blast effect. I will come to this in few minutes, and to this acronym IEDs, improvised explosive devices. When we talk about AWIPA, PA means populated areas. So populated areas are actually areas with high concentration of civilians. It's not necessarily an urban area or a city or a town. It can even be an IDP camp, internal displaced people camp. It can be a refugee camp. It can be even a village if you have a concentration of civilians. So that's the way we define a concentration of civilians in IHL, International Humanitarian Law. So when we look at this AWIPA issue, the use of explosive weapons in populated areas, we have this data. This is data for the last 10 years, and we can see here, it comes actually from AOV. It's an NGO based in the UK, and it's called Action on Armed Violence, and they have been gathering this data over the last 10 years. If we look at this data, more than 262,000 people have been killed or injured by those explosive weapons, and most of them in populated areas. So this means that on average, we have around 26,000 people who are being killed or injured by these devices. If we just look at the data we have from UNICEF side, and I should not say UNICEF, but the UN side, from the United Nations side, almost half of children who have been killed or injured in conflict in 2020 were killed or injured by explosive weapons. Actually, 47% of the children killed and injured in armed conflict were killed and injured by explosive weapons. So this is a slide just to show the overlap between what we call AWIPA and mine action. AWIPA is, as I mentioned, the issue of explosive weapons in populated areas. It's only about, not only, but it's mainly about explosive attacks. And it can be an airstrike, it can be shelling, it can be various ground engagement where explosive weapons are being used. For some of these explosive weapons, they can become what we call explosive remnants of war. Explosive remnants of war are unexploded ordnance and abandoned ordnance. And we have also landmines, and I will describe those devices in a moment. But mainly when we talk about mine action, we only talk about the risk of accident that may come up that may be generated by those devices. While when we talk about AWIPA, we talk about all type of either attacks or accidents involving those devices. And some of those devices, some of those weapons are used not in populated areas, of course. Here are what we call anti-personnel landmines. It's just a few examples. There are hundreds of models of anti-personnel landmines. An anti-personnel landmine is a device that is designed to be activated by the presence or by the proximity of a person. Even the disturbance of the ground may activate the device. So if you touch it, it may explode. If you step on it, it may explode. Even a 3 kg pressure, meaning even a child, when stepping on this device, may activate the device. So these are anti-personnel landmines. We have also anti-vehicle landmines. These are designed to be vehicle activated, and we call them sometimes anti-tank device or anti-tank landmines, but actually they can be activated by any vehicle, including, for example, a school bus. some of these devices are improvised. And here it's another universe of weapons that we call improvised explosive devices. And I did share with you some data about the effect of explosive weapons and the fact that around 26,000 people are being killed or injured every year. Actually, the weapon that kills, the explosive weapons that kill more people than any other weapon these days are IEDs, improvised explosive devices. So these are a few examples of devices that have been improvised and that are actually meet the definition of landmine because they are designed to be activated by the presence of a person, or the proximity of a person, and even the pressure of a person. So for example, on the right side, you have a hand grenade that is connected to a tripwire. If you activate the tripwire, it will remove the pin and it will activate the hand grenade. It's sometimes called a booby trap, but actually it's an IED and it's also a landmine according to the IHL definition that we have in the Mine Ban Treaty. There are many other IEDs. Here you see a few examples. Sometimes a toy can, actually anything can be an IED, can be transformed into an IED. A flower pot can become a flower pot bomb. A pressure cooker can become a pressure cooker bomb. So for children, for example, for people, for adults as well, it's very tricky because these devices do not look like weapons. They look like very common devices, of course. So it's very tricky for the population who are affected by these weapons. So this is a picture from Nepal. Then we have another category of explosive weapons, and we call them explosive remnants of war. And they can take different shape, and so many shapes. Thousands and thousands of different models exist and are being used. It can be a rocket, a mortar shell, a hand grenade, as we have seen. And we have two types of ERW. Those ERW meaning explosive remnants of war. Most of them are unexploded ordnance. And this is because whenever you have an airstrike, whenever there is a shelling somewhere in the world, we have to assume that at least 10% of those devices, they won't explode at the time of the impact. So they become unexploded ordnance, and they are very dangerous. And sometimes we have another type of ERW, explosive remnants of war. It's the abandoned ordnance. So an armed group, a security force, may leave behind them when they flee, when they leave the place where they are, they may abandon their device. So abandoned ordnance and unexploded ordnance are actually ERW. On this picture, you see a hand grenade, a simple hand grenade that has been used, but it didn't explode at the moment of the impact. So this device is extremely dangerous. It could even be more dangerous than a landmine in the sense that any single disturbance or even the passing of time or even the heat may generate the explosion. So it's a very unstable device, extremely dangerous, that may kill 2 or 3 people. It has that power. Actually, if we look at the data, this is global data with a picture from Caucasus, actually from Ossetia, close to Chechnya. And this boy is a survivor. He did tamper with a device and lost his right hand. Today, in the world, 66% of all ERW casualties, explosive remnants of war casualties, are children. They are the first victims of those devices. Another type of ERW, explosive remnants of war, another type of weapons here are cluster munitions, sometimes called bombies or bomblets. So they usually come from what we call a cluster bomb that may have hundreds of those small bombs that will be delivered often by air, and that will spread across a huge area. And it's very tricky, of course. As you can see on the bottom left, this looks really like a tennis ball, and it's actually an explosive weapon. So it's extremely attractive for any child who may find out this device. The other one on the left, on the right hand, it has a parachute. So it's not a toy, but it looks extremely attractive for any child who may find this, for example, in Serbia or in Afghanistan, two countries that have been affected by this device. But there are many others actually who have been affected by this form of cluster munition. Those devices are very, of course, very powerful. And as I said at the beginning, the definition of an explosive weapon is actually a weapon that has a blast effect and a fragmentation effect. So when we talk about the blast effect, this is exactly what you see here. When the device explodes, there's a shock wave, very powerful shock wave, and that will be disseminated in the body, in the leg here at supersonic speed, and it's like an overpressure. Even the destruction of the bones in the foot will create fragments that will be propelled, that will be projected within the body. So your body becomes even your enemy, because those fragments will come across the leg and will damage everything in your leg. So this is an example of what we call the blast effect. The blast effect has the power to even tear off a limb, an entire limb, as you can see on the right hand with this boy, with this teenager from Nepal who lost his two arms when he was when he found a plastic bag, and inside this plastic bag there was an IED. So this is the blast effect that is so powerful. It's not really, if it's a small weapon, it may not kill you, but it will injure you very, very badly. And this is combined with another effect that we call the fragmentation effect. So when an explosive weapon explodes, you have sometimes hundreds, sometimes more than 1,000 fragments, even from the body of the device, that will be spread through a certain radius, and that will actually have a killing effect. You have to imagine that each fragment here may be projected at the speed that is higher than the speed of a bullet coming out from a rifle. So it can be more than 1,500 meters per second. So it's very powerful. Each of these fragments has the power to kill anyone. So we have to deal with this combination in many countries. Like here you see a picture, not a picture, a drawing based on the reality of an environment in Mali, in West Africa, on the left hand, and in Libya on the right hand, where in this case in Libya, they are facing the use of EWIPA, explosive weapons in populated area. In the same time, they are facing the COVID-19 situation. So this is based on true stories that teenagers or children are facing in some of those countries. So why is mine action unique? And I should not necessarily say mine action, but why is this mine problem so unique and so important? And here I will really talk about landmines and all those devices such as IEDs and explosive remnants of war. First, their level of violence. I don't need to go into this because I just described this level of violence. The way they are designed to kill or to injure severely people. Another particular fact here, this is a human-made disaster. that we face, as I said, in more than 60 countries. It's completely made by human, it's intentional. Another characteristic when we talk about children is that not most, but perhaps at least half of the casualties among children are happening, these accidents are happening when children are playing. They find those devices, they are very attractive, and they play with them. Sometimes it's for socio-economic reasons, when they collect scrap metal and they want to resell those scrap metal. So it, as we have seen as well with the girl that we saw on the first slide, she was just collecting water. But in many occasions and in most countries, it's mainly when they are playing with those devices. They play with a hand grenade and then don't realize it's very dangerous. So playing can be very dangerous in those countries. What is very unique here as well is the guilt feeling. As I said, these devices, when we talk about landmines, are designed to be victim activated. On this picture, this device is a mortar shell. It was not designed to be victim activated, but it didn't explode, and it's there, it's contaminating the land. The child will find it and may play with it. And when you activate a device like that, you are somehow you are responsible of your own accident, and you have to manage this guilt feeling your entire life, because you are the one who activated the device. It's not like someone who was carrying a weapon and who was targeting you. Here, it's like an indiscriminate weapon that can kill anyone or injure anyone. Guilt feeling is one thing. The equity factor is very important. By equity here, I mean that what we observe in all those countries is that it's always the most vulnerable that are the first affected by these devices. I remember a story when a young woman who was a single mother and she had 8 daughters. She didn't have a single son, but 8 daughters in Nepal. And she was trying to collect fresh grass to feed the cow that was feeding the entire family. And it was very challenging during the dry season to find these fresh grass. So she found this fresh green grass in a minefield because no one was going there. So she took the risk and entered into that minefield to cut the grass, and because she wanted to feed the cow, she lost a leg because she activated the device. It's often the poorest people who are the first affected, as we have seen with this young girl that I mentioned on the first slide. Of course, and I won't dive into the details here, but it has a lot of socioeconomic impact. Landmine, a single landmine, if it's a threat on a road that bring you to the well, to the water source of the village, might actually block the access to this water source. A single landmine can do that. So it has a lot of also economic impact in the area where you live or where those people are living. And another point, this time very positive, is that most of those accidents, perhaps all of those accidents, are preventable by definition. And I will share here an example of facts from Afghanistan, where you have data about the leading cause of child casualties. So this is UN verified data from 2017. And you see that explosive remnants of war and improvised landmines, they were responsible for 862 children being killed or injured by those devices. Actually, these are only accidents. It means that they could be prevented even now, even before. They are all preventable. It's like a road traffic accident that can be prevented. Those accidents can be prevented. By definition, they are unintentional. They are accidents. While for an aerial operation, a ground engagement, other type of attacks. It's very hard for UNICEF, for my organization, for UNICEF, it's very hard to prevent this. We have some leverage, but limited leverage to prevent conflict. But we have a lot of leverage to prevent those accidents because they are unintentional. So they are preventable. And this is an example of activity in Syria, where actually a woman is educating 2 kids on risk education messages. And perhaps I will stop here for 1 minute and I stop sharing my screen and will show you a video from Yemen, just to showcase an example from another country highly affected by those devices.
أول مرة إن أنا اتعلمت اليوم وفهمت، فتحت عيوني على أشياء ما كنت أعرفها، الألغام والانفجارات.
Thank you so much, Susie. And let me resume the presentation.
Susie?
Yes.
Resume
Thank you.
the presentation, please.
Yes, we have it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Durbach. So this video was a striking example of a country highly affected by those devices. And it was done in 2019. And we, after 20 years of mine action in Yemen, more than 20 years actually, done by NGOs, by the government, by the UN and other organizations, still we realized that our campaigns didn't reach deaf children. And we actually realized when we were exploring the data on casualties that actually deaf children or deaf people were disproportionately, in a disproportionate way, they were highly affected by this device. So we had to target those very vulnerable population. And that's a pilot campaign that we conducted in 2019. So here's a slide to unpack quickly what is mine action. So mine action is divided into 5 pillars. One is demining, we call it also clearance. One is on risk education, explosive ordnance risk education. The third one is on victim assistance. The fourth one is on advocacy. Advocacy for mainly the Mine Ban Treaty, as well as other treaties, such as the Convention on Cluster Munition or the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. So these are very important treaties. And for example, for the international campaign to ban landmines, this campaign started in the early 90s. And some of you are very young, but may know that Princess Diana at that time was the ambassador of that campaign in the 90s to promote the idea that we should ban landmines. And it was a big success because at the end, the treaty entered into force in 99. So it's a more than 20-year-old treaty. And as of today, 164 countries have joined this treaty, banning the use of landmines in the world. So this pillar is very important. And then we have a fifth pillar, which is about the destruction of those devices. So far, since the Mine Ban Treaty entered into force, more than 55 million landmines have been destroyed by those states that had either produced or they were, using those devices. So this is another key pillar. The goal of this sector that we call mine action is to address the issue of explosive ordnance, to make sure that the people in our world are free from the threat of these devices. And the basis of these 5 pillars is that we need data. We need very strong data on the contamination, on casualties, on the risk, on the threat, to be able to prioritize and deliver all those interventions. So these are pictures on demining activities that are being conducted in various parts of the world. You see, this is a picture in front of the Annapurna, not far from the Himalayas, and this deminer has to clear all the vegetation around before he can even start digging the ground and identifying the landmines. These are pictures from a picture from Syria, where we educate the people. We help them to manage the risk of this device and convey a very important message, a safety message. Here, a picture from Ukraine, where along the contact zone, we have an important issue with landmines, of course, and other explosive ordnance. And teenagers here are educating children on the risk of those devices. So these 5 pillars are very important. They represent the work of our sector. You have many NGOs, many UN agencies that are engaged, many member states to deliver mine action. But we have to acknowledge that over the last 20 years, since this sector has been established, most of the activities have been conducted from a vision of the mine problem, mainly from a minefield perspective, mainly from a contamination perspective. The land is contaminated. We need to clear the land. We need to release the land. We need to get rid of the devices, and not so much through a people-centered approach. And that's why we think that we need to have a more public health approach to our sector. We need to be very explicit on that. So here is a slide that I think you are all familiar with. It's the definition of health from WHO. Health is not only about the risk of being injured or killed, about disease of infirmity. It's also about well-being, the well-being of people. It's a very broad definition that we have to take into account. And this well-being notion is very well reflected in the SDGs. Mine action is contributing to most or perhaps all of the SDGs. Here's a very old definition of public health. It's more than I would say more than a 100-year-old definition, but very meaningful. Public health is mainly about prioritizing prevention over treatment without neglecting treatment, but prevention is a very important component. And I will come to this in a few minutes. A very risky interpretation that we have, or confusion that we have when we talk about public health, there's often a confusion with the medical model. A medical model is actually a clinical model where we address one patient at a time, where we treat one person at a time. So for example, when we have a gunshot injury, this person will be treated for that gunshot. So this is the medical model that will be applied. But when we look at the issue of gun violence from a broader perspective, and what are the driving reasons of gun violence, and what are the interventions that we can conduct to address gun violence, this becomes what we call the public health model that will be used. So public health is valid for at community level, at village level, at district level, even at the worldwide level when we have, for example, a pandemic. Just to familiarize ourselves, and I'm talking even here about our own sector with what is public health. Actually, we believe that mine action is one public health intervention among many others that are reflected on this slide. And in our sector, we have a kind of paradigm that is dominating our sector. So this slide is actually about a paradigm. What is a paradigm? It's a pattern of thought. It's like a mental picture that we have about our own sector. So you may see here a rabbit, or you may see here a duck, depending on how your brain works, what is your own background, etc. There are many reasons for that, but we see the same picture, but we may have two different interpretations. In our sector, we need a new paradigm, and we need to move to a more public health approach. And I will explain here why through this slide. In our sector, pretty much everything is driven by what we call the land release approach. The focus or the center of gravity of mine action intervention is often on the land. We need to clear all the device, we need to clear the land. And it's driven by a value here, an overarching value, which is mainly about IHL treaty obligation, because countries have to get rid of those devices when they have signed the treaty, for example, the mine ban treaty. So it's very much driven by these treaty obligations in terms of prioritization. And the evidence, and we spend millions and millions of dollars every year in building the evidence through contamination surveys. It is very expensive actually to survey the land to identify those devices. The vision from that paradigm is a world free from those devices. What we would like to see is a shift to a more public health approach, noting here that these two approaches are complementary. They don't contradict each other. They are complementary, but we think that the center of gravity should be more balanced and more people-centered. And that's what you see on the right hand of the screen with the public health approach, where the people are at the center of the issue. We invest more on the people, on household survey, on understanding the impact of those devices on people, meaning here injury surveillance, the cornerstone of public health. We have a value here that is the preservation of human life that drives our prioritization here. And our vision here is more about a world free from the impact of those devices, rather than those devices at all. So the priority is to save the life of people, to save their lives and limbs. In the Mine Ban Treaty, we have this preamble, this first sentence, with this very much public health goal, where states are determined to put an end to this this epidemic of victim-activated explosions all over the world. This is an example from Cambodia, where we realized that because we had good data on casualties, we realized that only 27% of mine action assets were allocated to provinces that accounted for 75% of the casualties. So we realized that we were not targeting the right provinces where we had so many victims. We had to reverse this. And this is how and why we need this public health approach and focus more on, as I said, saving lives and limbs of those people. Briefly, this is another aspect of the public health approach. When we look at the 5 pillars of mine action, the 4 pillars on the left are pretty much about prevention. We want to prevent those, we want this incident to not happen through advocacy, risk education, clearance, through the destruction of those devices. If an accident happens, it's still possible to provide victim assistance and maybe to save the life of someone who got injured. So this pillar on victim assistance is still about prevention, but we call that secondary prevention, or sometimes tertiary prevention, because we believe that the survivor can still become again an equal, can rejoin his community and recover his limbs and his full capacity as an equal member of his community. On the public health approach, this is a slide from Sri Lanka where we have seen the casualty data, where we are seeing now the casualty data. And I think last year it was confirmed that we had 0 casualties in Sri Lanka, which means that in a country as big as Sri Lanka, as highly affected, with still a contamination of those devices, we manage to control the epidemic of those devices because we have now 0 casualties from those devices.
Right.
So it's still possible. So here's my, I think my last slide about the recommendation we have for the sector. I won't go through this because I think we run out of time. But we'll share this presentation with all of you. These are a set of consideration for our sector. But my final message here to all of you is that we have an agenda, not only the SDGs, but we have also an agenda, and by 2025, the overall goal we have is to clear the land wherever we have this contamination and to finish the clearance. But we think that it's not necessarily realistic, but with a public health approach, we still can manage another goal, which is to have 0 casualties in those countries that are highly affected by these devices. If we adopt a public health approach to mine action, something that is already being done in some of the countries I mentioned before, such as Sri Lanka. I will stop here and hand over back to you.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. So the first question from the students is, how can people contribute to your mission beyond the informational content? And can people donate or volunteer?
There are many ways to contribute. You know, in every country, there should be a campaign ongoing campaign on, you know, promoting the ban of landmines or promoting the end of use of EWIPA, explosive weapons in populated areas. So, for example, Ireland is leading a process next year. They will meet in February in Geneva, and they will lead a process to make sure there is a political declaration signed by as many countries as possible to avoid the use of these weapons in populated areas. So depending on your country, it can be an affected country, or it can be a high income country where your own country is involved in this use of weapons. You still can advocate through the civil society against the use of these weapons. If you look at a UN website or NGO website, or the International Campaign to Ban Landmines website, you will have also plenty of resources on how you can sign a petition, how you can raise your voice, and how you can even contribute as a volunteer, or sometimes even a financial contribution can be welcomed through those platforms. Many NGOs are very active, and you may know some of them, like Norwegian People Ahead, Mine Advisory Group, Hello Trust, Humanity and Inclusion, Danish Refugee Council, etc. There are so many, I won't mention all of them, but this is a way to perhaps to participate and to contribute to this struggle. It's only because the general public was very aware of the issue of landmines that we managed to get at the end a convention to ban those devices. Without the general public, we won't have an we would not be in a position where we could really advocate against this device and put together this treaty. So it's every single voice counts a lot. Thanks.
Thank you. April 4th is observed as the International Day for Mine Awareness and Assistance in Mine Action. What will be the main theme of International Mine Awareness Day in 2022?
Yes, every year, April 4 is our special day to celebrate mine action, to celebrate all those efforts. It's like a UN day dedicated to these. So it's the topic, the agenda for April 4 for 2022 will be on having a safe world, safe from the threat of those devices. So it will be all about safety, a safe home, safe step, safe environment for those devices. We can share later more details, but it's April 4 and there will be a number of celebrations all over the world in all the capitals, but even at local level.
Thank you. How long can a mine stay active?
Actually, to be honest, no one knows the response to that question. These days in Europe, you still can find devices from the First World War that have the capacity to explode. So in France, my own country, we have dozens and dozens of deminers who are working every day to clear the land because we still find devices from World War II, from World War I, and sometimes from a war from the 1870s. So those devices still can kill a long time after that. So they will last longer than any of us, for sure. So they have a very long lifespan. Same for IEDs, improvised explosive devices, unfortunately.
How many explosive mines are there in the world? And do you know which country or city has the most landmines?
In terms of landmines, it's very difficult to say. As one Afghan person said one day, I will know how many landmines we have in our country the day we will remove the last landmine. So meaning that we don't know, but Afghanistan is one of the most mine affected countries in the world, but there are many others. Angola has been very highly affected, and many others. Vietnam or Laos have been highly affected by landmines and ERW, and maybe some of them are still some of the most contaminated areas in the world. If in terms of fresh contamination, Yemen, Syria, Libya, Ukraine, I mean the eastern part of Ukraine are among the most affected areas. Colombia as well, we should not forget this part of the world. Colombia as well is highly affected by landmines. So these are among some of the states, some of the countries that are the most affected by those devices.
Thank you so much. Do all of those countries adhere to the rules laid out by the Ottawa Conference? And are there any sanctions or penalties for countries who violate the agreement?
There are, as I said, 164 countries did sign the Ottawa Convention, the Mine Ban Treaty. And other countries, they still were observers. They might have a moratorium. They might have policies, and often they have those policies where they don't necessarily use landmines. They may have landmines, but they don't use them. So they meet once a year, actually twice a year they meet to discuss the convention and the obligation towards the convention. And when the meeting of state parties meet, they go through all the obligation, and one of the obligations is to report back on your efforts. So there are some types of sanction, but the first sanction I would say that you may face if you don't meet your obligation towards the treaty, one of the first sanctions is that the whole public will be aware that you don't meet your obligations toward the treaty. So a campaign like that can be very damaging for the reputation of a country. There are other sanctions that are in place, and I won't dive into that. But of course, yes, there are sanctions if you don't meet the requirement of those treaties.
Very interesting. Thank you. What are the prospects for reducing the level of danger in countries where hostilities are taking place, like the ones you mentioned, and what international agreements can help facilitate or minimize this?
So in terms of what can be done in those countries, we have various tools. Of course, even many of the countries where we work have not joined the treaty. Sometimes none of those treaties. So, for example, Myanmar has not joined any of those treaties related to indiscriminate weapons. But still, we can do a lot. We can advocate with the government. We can still use evidence or a public health approach to explain how those devices are killing and maiming the local population, their own children. And through this advocacy, we advocate for mine action intervention that will mitigate, that will minimize the effect of those devices. As I mentioned, the political declaration on EWIPA that is being negotiated by Ireland. I mean, it's a process led by Ireland, and that will resume early next year. This process should help mitigate those risks. For example, Belgium is a country that has been producing landmines in the past, but they have signed the treaty. They don't produce any more landmines. But more than that, they have now decided, the Parliament of Belgium, they have decided to stop using explosive weapons in populated areas. So this is a commitment from the Parliament, from a country that has been involved in many operations throughout the world. And through this type of engagement, we can, if countries are reducing or avoiding the use of explosive weapons in populated areas, this will really drastically contribute to minimize the risk. So I hope I answer here. It's not a fully fledged answer, but it covers some of the points you raised.
That makes sense. Thank you. Next question is related to Ukraine. So the war on the territory of Ukraine has been going on for 8 years, and as a result of which many small children have been suffering. In your opinion, what can we as volunteers do to alleviate the impact of war and weapons on children's psyches?
So yes, Ukraine is highly affected by these devices, landmines and explosive remnants. And as I speak, a number of organizations and the government of Ukraine are very active and very engaged on addressing these in particularly through risk education. So through what we call explosive ordnance risk education. So in the schools, in government control areas and non-government control areas in Ukraine, in Eastern Ukraine, you have ongoing campaigns through, as I said, schools, but also radio, TV, internet, through many ways. What the issue in Ukraine is that because the conflict is not over, it's not possible to clear the land as we speak. It's not possible to have a humanitarian clearance, a systematic humanitarian clearance response. But this is being negotiated at high level to make sure we can clear as many devices as possible. What can volunteers do from all over the world is to first consult what on internet, you can Google it, you can see what are the activities that are ongoing in Ukraine on mine action, on the mine action front. And again, we can contribute to the advocacy campaign to have a stronger mine action response in Ukraine. What we can do as well, and we do that already, is contribute to victim assistance, to assist those who have been affected by those devices and who are the survivors of these devices. And Ukraine will soon have a new policy, a new law that will address also this issue in a more comprehensive way. So again, the volunteers are welcome to join the efforts made by NGOs and the UN on this front.
Thank you. Given all of these solutions, do you think it's possible to get rid of all explosive and regular weapons in the world? And if so, how?
I think this is a very aspirational goal to get rid of all those devices. I think it's unrealistic, but we have tools, we have new initiatives at global level, sometimes at local level as well, to mitigate, to minimize this risk. So we have managed to demonstrate that through the Mine Ban Treaty that it's possible to ban a weapon. That never happened in the history of humanity, that 164 countries agreed to completely ban a weapon. And as I speak, only one country is using landmines in the world. So it's only one in the ground. So this brings a lot of hope. We won't get rid of all those explosive weapons. They will still be used, but what we can advocate for all of us is to have a stronger implementation of international humanitarian law. And again, as I said, to advocate together against the use of these explosive weapons in populated areas. Your government, your respective government should have a commitment, exactly like Belgium did, to avoid the risk, to avoid the use of these explosive weapons. And it's possible in 2022 to do that.
Thank you. One of the students was wondering, what should they do if they or another person steps on a landmine, and how would they save themselves if they see explosives?
If someone is injured by a device like this, there is not much thing you could do. If you are in a minefield, you still survive from this device, the first thing you should do is to not move around, because there might be other devices. So you will ask for help if you can, and usually there might be people in the community not far from you who will call for help and make sure you can be rescued. If you are in a minefield, this is very tricky, because even the rescue team should not be impacted by those devices. If not in a minefield, if you are in a safe area, meaning that you can go around or people can rescue you easily, then you are in a safer situation. But this is why first aid and emergency victim assistance is so crucial, because the first minutes, the first hour after the explosion, it's still possible. It might be still possible to save your life. You really rely on those communities, on those local authorities who will be there to support you as much as they can.
Thank you. I'm sure that's very helpful. And going on that same route, how can we help children recognize explosive objects? Do you think it's possible to put a sticker on the weapons? And what should children do when they find a mine or weapon?
So on that point, we won't do that. We will never promote the use of stickers to put on a weapon. This is something it has. There's one case where a campaign has used stickers on weapons, and it was actually harming children and people because people misunderstood the message. Whenever you see a weapon, you should not approach it. You should not touch it. So it means even less you putting a sticker on it. So what we do is that we use visuals, we use drawings, we use pictures to show to children how those devices look like and what they should do. And even a very young child should understand that these devices that look very attractive should not be approached, should not be touched. And if they see them, they should report back to their family, to their elders, to an adult, to a teacher. They should report back in a safety way. So they should never approach or touch those devices. So all the campaigns are based on that, on behavioral change approach, where we make sure that the child will adopt the right behavior. And children are very open to behavior change and to adopt those safety behaviors. And they may become very influential in their community because they can influence their parents, the whole community, because they are themselves open to behavior change. So they are a powerful vehicle for behavior change.
Last question from the students is there a comprehensive health program aimed at preventing, treating, and rehabilitating people directly or indirectly affected by landmines, like if they potentially have PTSD or if they were injured? And can you tell us what is included in these types of programs?
Yes, a number of countries have this comprehensive approach where not only we will address the first aid, the first emergency medical support to the survivor, but also address the long-term support that the survivor will need. So this is all about physiotherapy, about rehabilitation, providing prosthetics, orthesis, all those devices that will replace your limbs. And it's not only about that, it's about, as you said, PTSD or the mental health approach, where we need to support the recovery of the survivor. This mental health dimension is super important. The psychosocial support is very important as well. And it's not only that. So for example, we will invest on inclusive education to make sure that a child who has been injured, who is traumatized, who lost his eyesight, for example, can still reintegrate the education system. So for that, it will require a comprehensive, a holistic approach, what we call a holistic victim assistance approach, to provide all those support. So it's very complex, and it's ongoing in some of the countries. Colombia is very good in providing this public health approach. I should not say public health here, but victim assistance approach. And many other countries are able to do that, but it requires the engagement of many other organizations. You cannot do that on your own. You need a coalition of organizations that is able to address this in a holistic way. So then survivor can fully reintegrate their community, their society.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Laurenge. This was very, very important and very educational, and I'm sure it provided a lot of food for thought for all of our audience. So I would like to thank you again and have a wonderful holiday season and a very, very good 2022. Hopefully things will improve in the area of being aware of the mines, and that many people will learn how to avoid them when they are faced with it. So goodbye. And Susie, thank you for asking questions and for hosting. Have a very good week. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.